Hello and welcome to Real Life Faith, episode 24. My name is Chris, and I'm one of the pastors here at Fairview Church in Englewood, Ohio. And I would like to welcome you to being a part of this episode. And if you are not familiar with Real Life Faith, you can go back and look at episode 1 where I kind of talk about it. And there's a book we're using called Banding Together. And inside that book, it's like a workbook where we are going through. There's 7 days of reading in each week. That's how it works. There's just 7 days in a week, in case anybody didn't know how that works. And we go through certain passages each week, and this week, this is what those look like. We're going through Numbers, and we'll be finishing Numbers in next week's episode of Real Life Faith and getting into Deuteronomy. So if you would like to receive one of those books, you can send us a text message or you can email the address there on your screen. And before we get started, I'd like to ask the questions that we ask every week. How many days this week did you read your Bible? And this is not a question to imply guilt. This is just a question for you to ask yourself as a spiritual formation kind of thing. And I try to make the first thing I do every morning, I have this Bible app, and every morning, every day, they kind of have like a verse of the day. And if I do nothing else in the morning, I hit that app at least. And just spend a little time processing that verse above and beyond everything else. It's just what I try to do first thing every day, and I would challenge you to do the same. There's something to it. There's something about just getting that day started, and with that as your first thing that you do. And I also like it too because when your eyes are a little blurry in the morning, you know their app is really big and clear, big letters, so it makes it easy to do that. So how many days this week did you read your Bible, and how did you hear God speak to you this week? And I'm a firm believer that God speaks to all of us. It's just a matter of if we're listening or not. And if you are doing this journal, or if you're just doing a screenshot and using the verses that we're going along with, I would like to hear a journal entry that you did. Or if you just wrote down a thought of some sort that you had in your own personal reading, I'd like to hear that too. You can put that in the comments below, or send an email address to that email address, or text us, either one. And do you have any questions from your reading? Do you have any questions from, if you're doing the Banding Together book, do you have any questions from that? So moving on, I'm just going to be silent and let you read through these questions yourself. Actually, I'm not going to leave enough time for you to read them all. So if you'd like to pause right now and just spend a little time processing these questions. So this week we're going from Numbers 19 all the way down to Numbers 32. Yes, it is a rapid pace. That's a lot for a week, but that's why I try to keep this podcast short. This should not be the entirety of your biblical exploration, but if you want to go through and do this podcast with us, I'm going to do all 52 episodes that should take us all the way through the book. I haven't clarified that for sure to make sure that we even stop at 52, but I'm going to at least make it to there, and then see what's left in the book to do, and try to continue on from there. But hopefully you have another outlet in your life that you're exploring God's Word, and I hope you're able to do that. But if not, this is a great place for you, and I'm so glad that you're watching this video and being a part of this. I so appreciate everybody who keeps up with these videos and didn't give me any flack for being a little bit late on the previous episode. That is awesome. You are people of grace and mercy, and I appreciate you greatly. So here we go. This is day one. Day one had Numbers 19 and 20. And Numbers 19 and 20 was what we're going to focus on here. There are no right answers as to what's the thing you should focus on in each chapter. By the way, if you're going through this and you're wondering how did I pick verse 19 or chapter 19 verse 20, that's just the one I picked. So the person who refuses the cleansing process is considered unclean because they have defiled the Lord's sanctuary. Now, what this is talking about, God takes holiness seriously. The red heifer ritual can seem strange to modern people, But the underlying message is important. Approaching a holy God isn't something we should treat casually. This also provides a wonderful opportunity to talk about how Christ ultimately provides the cleansing that the Old Testament sacrifices were pointing towards. So if you don't understand that, Christ was the ultimate sacrifice. Christ fulfilled those sacrifices for us. So it can seem odd to do an entire heifer as a sacrifice that we don't have to do anymore. It can seem strange to us, but that was the standard of the time, and God fulfilled that eventually through Jesus, of course, but it was important at the time that people did as they were instructed to do, and God takes that seriously. Numbers 20, verse 12 is what I picked out, and it said, God tells Moses and Aaron that because they did not rush him enough or honor him before Israel, I'm sorry, let me read that correctly. Numbers 20:12 said, God tells Moses and Aaron that because they did not trust him enough to honor him before Israel, they would not lead the people into the promised land. Now, can you imagine? I'd be a little miffed, I have to say. But even faithful leaders are accountable to God. Moses had faithfully served God for decades at this point, yet his disobedience at the rock had consequences. God doesn't mean that our choices don't matter. We can also talk about the danger of allowing frustration with people to affect our obedience of God. I'm telling you, I spend time processing that every time I read this. I'm like, oh my gosh, here's Moses. Here's one of the heroes of our faith. And he didn't get to see the promised land because he didn't trust. And after all those years, we would like to think, well, after all those years of service, you're going to take me out for this one issue. I used to have a coach in high school at basketball that, I'd be out there playing and doing my best. I'd make one mistake and he'd put me on the bench. He was just one of those coaches. And I always found that frustrating. It's like, dude, I learned from that mistake. Let me get up and down the court a few times and let me reprocess through that. And so I'm putting my earthly ideas onto a godly topic. And so when I bring my earthly ideas and apply it to a godly topic, it doesn't work out so well. But it's important. And that's why we have this in this text, that we can read about. There is that danger of allowing that frustration to impact how we respond to things and our obedience to God. Day 2 got into Numbers 21. So Numbers 21, 8 through 9, God tells Moses to make a bronze snake and put it on a pole so that those who look at it will live. And the idea is to look to God for healing. Jesus himself connects the bronze serpent to his own crucifixion in John 3, 14 and 15. The Israelites couldn't save themselves. They had to look in faith at God's provision. That is a powerful picture of the gospel. We don't save ourselves. We look to Christ. So that's what the people were being called to do. And if you haven't read Numbers, this verse is a little bit out of context, so it's a little bit hard to track with. So I'd encourage you to go back and read Numbers 21 if you haven't read that. And in Numbers 22, 38, Balaam tells Balak that he can speak only what God puts in his mouth. God is sovereign, even over people who don't fully understand him. Balaam is one of the strangest characters in Numbers. Balaam wants to use him to curse Israel. He's trying to leverage his connection to God to do something. But God makes it clear that Balaam cannot simply say whatever he wants. God remains in control even when people are working directly against his purposes. That's some deep stuff. And if you haven't read Numbers 22, this kind of feels out of context, and I would encourage you to go back and read Numbers 22. But we'll move on today, number 3, in Numbers 23 and 24. Numbers 23:19 says, God is not human, that he should lie, not a human being, that he should change his mind. And the important thing to note here is that God keeps his promises. Balak wants Balaam to curse Israel, but Balaam can't overturn God's blessing. This is a tremendous reminder that God's promises aren't dependent upon human circumstances. What God has said, he will accomplish. Also on day 3 was Numbers 24, and 24:17 is kind of like what I saw as a highlight of this chapter. And it says, Balaam speaks of the future ruler who will come from Jacob, represented by a star and a scepter. God's plan is so much bigger than the present. Israel is still wandering in the wilderness, but God is already pointing toward the future. Christians can see this prophecy in the larger biblical story of this coming king and ultimately Jesus. And God is working out a plan that his people can yet see in its fullness. And you know, there were people at that time that wouldn't see that fullness, but they were part of that story that we get to see today. And it's awesome. It's awesome we get to see it all in the whole thing. But we're also part of that story. And I would challenge you to know that you are part of that continuing story, whether you know it or not. And just like the Israelites couldn't see their part in that overall story at their time, maybe sometimes we don't see ours either. And that can be a challenge. I've been there. Day 4 is Numbers 25 and 26, and Numbers 25:11 says, Phinehas is commended because he was zealous for God's honor and turned away God's wrath from Israel. Now, again, this is one of those, it's like a verse taken out of context. You got to go read Numbers 25 to understand this whole thing. But the important thing to know is that spiritual compromise can be dangerous. Israel's greatest threat wasn't always an army outside the camp. Sometimes the greater danger was compromise from within the camp. In today's society, we know of all sorts of stories where pastors, good people, with great intentions, who have allowed those compromises to slip into their lives and have brought incredible damage to their own ministries. And you can about talk to anybody today who is willing to be open about that, and any one of us have stories of when a pastor compromised their values and caused damage to their ministry and to the church they were part of. And you can go all over social media and find those examples. So this is an important one, and it's an important one to think about as everyday people, and it's an important one to think of as pastors. It's one of those things that we need to process and keep in mind that we can't let these temptations pull us away and compromise who we are called to be. But I'm not going to get long-winded on that. Moving on with the second part of day 4, Numbers 26, verses 64 and 65. And it says, none of those counted in the new census were among those counted in the earlier census, except Caleb and Joshua. God brings this whole new generation forward. 40 years have passed, and the generation that refused to enter the promised land had largely disappeared by this point, yet God's promise hadn't disappeared. People may fail, but God's purposes continue. There's something to be said for the importance of passing on from generation to generation, even within the church to this day. It's highly important that we pass on that faith to the generation behind us. I often wonder, this is just me, I often wonder, sometimes in sci-fi circles, they will hint at these ideas of generational spaceships, a spaceship that is sent off to a destination that is so far away that the people who initially get in the ship and go will not live long enough to go there. Like I think Alpha Centauri is our closest star to our sun in our solar system. I think it's Alpha Centauri. I hope I was really smart in that and not really stupid by saying that, but that was the one that came to mind. And, it's like, I don't know, thousands of years to get there. So, the only way we could get there would be to have like a generational starship. Well, that would be kind of mean, wouldn't it? If you were just born just to be one in a number of people, like on a starship going to a star, it's kind of an interesting concept. But I can't imagine how upsetting that would be to be a part of that if you realize that was the point of your life. But in this case, it's the fulfillment of God's promise that has continued on. It's not just some random journey to another star, like in my example. But we'll move on, get away from my nerdiness and get back to this. Day 5, this is Numbers 27:18. God tells Moses to take Joshua, a man in whom is the Spirit, and commission him as the next leader. This is Moses, like, my time is ending, your time is starting. And preparing that next generation is what's important. Moses isn't going to enter the promised land, but God's work isn't ending. Joshua will lead the people forward. This is just a powerful application for the church. And are we preparing people to carry the mission forward after we're gone? You know, last night I was with our youth, and our Pastor Spencer is our youth pastor here at Fairview, and it takes that job so seriously, of like preparing our youth and equipping them in their faith. And I love that our youth here at Fairview take that seriously. Like, there is something amazing going on here with this youth group at Fairview, that Spencer takes that seriously, and our youth take that seriously, and it's just wonderful to see that. And if you are looking for a church where your youth can be invested in, this is that place, because our youth pastor Spencer is just one of those guys that I look up to for what he does with our youth. Moving on to the next passage here on day 5, Numbers 28, verse 2, God commands Israel to make sure his offerings are presented at their appointed times. This chapter is largely about those regular sacrifices and appointed worship. And it reminds us that spiritual maturity isn't just about dramatic moments with God. Much of faithfulness consists of showing up, worshiping, praying, serving, and obeying day after day after day. And what a great reminder this is. Moving on to day 6, Numbers 29, verse 40 is what I'm focusing on. Moses tells the Israelites to observe the appointed festivals and offerings according to God's commands. You know, this is kind of like Moses, like making sure everything he's taught them, making sure they remember it, because he's not going to be with them anymore. And he was remembering God's story. The festivals weren't simply religious ceremonies. They helped Israel remember what God had done and who they were as his people. We need spiritual practices that keep God's faithfulness in front of us, rather than allowing today's circumstances to determine our view of him. On day 6, we had Numbers 30, and this is verse 2. A person who makes a vow to the Lord must not break their word, but must do what they have promised. And the importance here is that our words matter. God expects his people to take their commitments seriously. In an age of casual promises, forgotten commitments, and I'll get around to it, this chapter offers a straightforward challenge. Can people trust our word? And we really need these spiritual practices in front of him to determine our view of him, so that we remain committed when we say we're going to do something, that we remember to do that, because we're representing God to those people around us in every action that we do. And finally, on day 7 is Numbers 31 and 32. I skipped Numbers 31 and just went straight to 32 because I felt like there was too much to unpack in there. But Numbers 32:23, but if you fail to do this, you will be sinning against the Lord, and you may be sure that your sin will find you out. Our choices affect those around us. You know, there's a holistic impact to when we make poor choices. The tribes of Reuben and Gad want to settle east of the Jordan, but Moses makes sure their decision doesn't become an excuse for abandoning the rest of Israel. Their responsibility is bigger than their personal interests. And this is a great discussion of community responsibility and keeping our commitment to one another. There's just such an importance to remembering that what we do matters to those around us. Sometimes we can get so focused on our personal desires that we create issues for those around us. And that's something to put to prayer. Like, in what ways have my decisions caused issues for others around me? And that's a fair thing to reflect on. So we're getting towards the end of this podcast, and I like to ask these same questions every week. Who are you praying for this week and why? And who are you praying would surrender their life to Jesus? And who is someone you could start a discipleship group with here in the future? If you would like one of these books to do that, you could totally send us a text message, and we can send you one of these. Next week, episode, I think that would be 25, we will be looking at these, we'll be finishing up Numbers, and we'll be getting into Deuteronomy. And if you would like to do a screenshot of what that is here so you know what direction we're going next week, that you can do that. And I want to thank you for being a part of Real Life Faith. Thanks for watching.